Well, hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha TV. You're watching India Fights Back with me, Rajat Kane. Well, this is one-stop show where we get you latest of India's fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. And in this episode, we'll explore how the mode of evolution itself could perhaps be a natural barrier towards corona in some percentage of population. Now, to understand this rather complex phenomenon better, in simple words, we have to go back to at least 60,000 years when the migration of early and archaic humans began on the earth. Now, with the adaptation and the intermingling, we all underwent certain change in our genome sequencing, that is our DNA, our RNA, of course, and of course the genetic information, and in addition and subtraction to certain biological values in our system. One of them is protein, whose presence and deficiency is being studied to understand behavior of virus, and in today's world, or to say in today's context, the coronavirus, which has brought upon us this pandemic called COVID-19. Now, a study conducted by a team of scientists from National Institute of Biomedical Genomics in Kalyani, West Bengal, have found a biological reasoning for the slower spread of a mutant of coronavirus in Asia as compared to countries, or to say people who live in countries in the West. They argue that how a high level of human protein, neutrophil elastase, that is a form of protein, helps the virus to enter human cell, multiply and also spread faster from infected individuals. There is now this particular protein, neutrophil elastase, is kept in check by a biological system which in turn produces another protein called alpha-1 antitrypsin, or AAT, and this is the AAT deficiency that leads to higher level of neutrophil elastase in cells, which in turn helps in the faster spread of the virus. Now, the deficiency is known to be much higher in Europe and America rather than in the Asian countries. Well, so clearly, as I said, we really have to go back 60,000 years at least to understand this phenomenon of the genome sequencing. However, in the show, we'll not go and discuss the anthropology. It was a rather, explanation as to how we have to take this discussion forward. Now, we are joined with Dr. Rakesh Agrawal, Director, JIPMR from Puducherry. Many thanks for joining us, sir. Dr. Sanjay Rai, Professor, Community Medicine, AIIMS, Delhi, and Professor Shailendra K. Saxena, Professor, KGMU from Lucknow. Well, many thanks, gentlemen, for bearing a rather long monologue. I usually avoid such things, but for this discussion, we really have to go back in certain context, rather we can say. Dr. Agrawal, I would like to start with you, sir. There is a study about the protein and, of course, the other protein. For the benefit of our viewers, I know I'm not a medical expert here. I'm a student of history, but my interest in anthropology led me to pick up this anthropology and the DNA mutation. In terms of that, this study definitely shows up a trend. Is there a larger point to these studies in terms of studying protein and their reaction with the virus? Correlation, I'm sorry, yeah.
So what this study has done is, it has looked at nearly 70,000 sequences of SARS coronavirus 2, the virus which causes COVID-19, which had been sequenced up to July 2020 and analyzed. And in that, it looked for a certain kind of variant. So we are hearing of the UK variant, we are talking about South African variant, Brazilian variant. Those are variants which have clinical relevance. So we are here not talking of those variants. There is a variant which is known as D614G, that is one amino acid is changed, but it's not thought to have much of clinical consequences. And they have tried to relate where in the world that variant is more commonly prevalent with certain genetic characteristics in the human genome in certain populations.
Right.
So biologically, it may be interesting to study, but if we think that we can explain what is happening to disease in different parts of the world, whether this study has relevance to that or not, I think it's very, very early to say. Maybe yes, but maybe nothing. So it's an interesting biological description, but what it actually means, because the paper has just appeared, we'll need to look at it. We'll need to look at other data. Such a paper, if I have to read it in detail, I would need about 4 or 5 hours to fully understand
Absolutely.
it and look at it. And
Absolutely.
my attention to this was drawn by your channel a few minutes ago. So, but I would say that all I can say is it's interesting, but we'll have to see what it means.
Many thanks, Dr. Agrawal, for opening remarks. We'll come back to you. Dr. Sanjay Rai, are we seeing in terms, if we talk of the spread of disease in India, is there a data which says there are certain groups which have been found more susceptible, certain group more susceptible towards transmitting, if not getting infected, and a group which is completely, you can say, asymptomatic at all? I mean, is there a sequencing that we have done in terms of the groupings?
See, before discussing we must know how all these infectious disease transmit from one person to other or in the community. We calculate this based on the basic reproduction rate, or we say or not. So or not is nothing, but it's affected by many biological. This could be one of this protein could be one of the biological factor. Many socio-behavioral factors and environmental factors that govern the pathogen transmission, right? While we estimating, it's a complex phenomena, but we calculate for to see the transmissibility of these three, and all our actions depends on that only. Like the first most important is duration of contagiousness after a person become infected. And this is almost constant for infectious disease, like for other COVID-19, SARS coronavirus 2, or influenza, or for any. So this is usually constant, but we consider this while we calculate this or not. Then the likelihood of infection per contact between an infectious person and also susceptible person. And this is not a constant. Like suppose if you are wearing mask, then the likelihood of this getting infection is less. So we can make a dent on this. And third one is your contact rate. This governed by your population density, etc. In India, sufficient evidence that population density playing a very important role. Like see, in many slum areas, or the recent your Zero survey also indicated that in urban area, particularly in the slum area, the overall infection rates are very high. So these are the governing infection and transmissibility of this virus. I fully agree with Dr. Agrawal that it's premature to comment anything on this protein is playing a role on. This could be, there is a possibility that this protein is also playing a role, but we don't have sufficient evidence. This is just an observation. They have made some observation, and in science we generate some hypothesis based on observations, and then we can generate more evidences. Yeah.
Right. Dr. Sanjay Rai, still early days in terms of having any conclusion. And even that's what the doctors who have conducted this study, Nidan Biswas and Partho Majumdar, the scientists rather, they have been observed that, of course, like it's early days. Now, how important is it to study protein in terms of the spread of any virus? Professor Saxena, like, could you just explain to viewers, like, or the students who are watching the show, how important is it to study, or rather, what significance does protein in a body lies when it comes to virus?
So in this particular paper, what has been shown is that there is a mutation called D614G. So that means at the 614th place, the D, which is an aspartic acid, changes to glycine. And this is a non-synonymous mutation. That means the two amino acids which are changed, they were not actually complementing each other.
Okay.
The importance of this is that this particular mutation is actually located between the S1 RBD and S1 and S2 junction of the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein. And all of us, we know now that the spike protein is one of the most important protein in the attachment of the virus, not only at the level of the pathogenesis, but also at the level of the prognosis of the patient. So what this paper has shown that if this mutation happens, then neutrophil elastase, which is an enzyme which is actually controlled by this mutation, is actually overproduced. And if that is overproduced, the lung pathogenesis increases, and then the morbidity or the fatal infections might increase. And that might be one of the reasons behind so many reasons which have been suggested for the higher mortality rate in the Western population compared to the Southeast Asia, because in Southeast Asia, this mutation has been found at a very, very least proportion compared to the Western.
Right, right. That's really important, Professor. That's really important, Professor Saxena. Dr. Rakesh Agrawal, I mean, like it's still early days to actually to conclude anything out of the study. Of course, like there'll be further studies upon this, on the hypothesis that has been set in the study. Now, historically speaking, when we talk of any pandemic or any disease per se, how does it reacts on a different set of population having a different genetic sequencing? I mean, here, like a different race per se, or for that matter, like people living in Western countries, in Europe, susceptible to a particular thing, and people living in maybe like in Asia or Africa or South Americas having a different reaction to it. What has been a historical propensity of it?
So when we look at a pandemic, most of the pandemic diseases have been new diseases that came into the population. When that happens, it is believed that none of the populations has had exposure to the pathogen in the past, and they are not naturally immune to it. However, there are factors that affect the spread of disease and that affect the severity of disease. Yes, genetics can be one factor, but very often there are other factors that are responsible. For instance, in India, our population is younger. A very small proportion of our population is above 60 or 65 years of age. That is much lower than what you would have in Europe or in US. Now, this disease, COVID, is more severe in elderly. So when disease affected northern part of Italy, which is mainly the place where people in Europe and USA go for settling once they retire, and there is a whole lot of people who are above 80 years of age, those people were particularly severely affected. If you see in the US, again, areas where such old people live and old age homes have been affected much more severely. Whereas for us, because our population is much younger, it is much less. Secondly, in areas where there are many infections, for instance, us, if people have been exposed to a virus or another pathogen which has some similarity with the new virus, then because of infection with that previous virus, they would have some protective ability, protective immunity, and they would have a milder disease compared to those where that is not there. Thirdly, it depends largely on the population density. If people live in dense clusters, the infection rate would be much higher, the infection would spread much faster, and you would see much more disease. And that's what we have seen. There has been much more disease in the metropolitan cities than in the rural areas, and the same is true around the world. So there are many other factors than genetics that affect it. Genetic factors, yes, they can affect, but proving those needs much more effort than what we can see for the current study that we have under reference today. This study is what we in science call as an in silico study. You take sequences, you sit down on a computer, you analyze, and you find something. For instance, I could measure everything among people, and I could say heart attack occurs much more in a particular population. And I could say, for instance, baldness is also much more in that population. But I cannot conclude that baldness is associated with or leads to heart disease. The underlying factor is old age, which causes baldness and causes heart disease. So, this kind of findings come up in literature all the time, but they have to stand the test of time. Other people have to look at this. This has to be looked at in real life situation. This is only a hypothesis based on a computer analysis of the virus sequences and human sequences. I won't go beyond that.
Right. That's important. It's a hypothesis, as we are saying. It's not a final study yet. And as our doctor fraternity on the show are emphasizing, furthermore study is required on this so has to have any corroborative, of that matter, any conclusive deduction to it. Dr. Sanjay Rai, keeping this study aside, now what explains, the slower spread of the mutant coronavirus in India? I know it's a fantastic thing that we have not been affected by strains that we have seen in UK, in Brazil, in South Africa, and in one case in UK, the Prime Minister of UK himself mentioned that it's spreading really fast. But here in India, we have been largely immune towards it. What explains that phenomenon, Dr. Rai?
If you see this mutant variety, UK mutant, I'm talking about only the UK mutant variety.
UK, okay.
This
right, okay.
The main mutation is in spike protein, right? And the researchers, they have found that through either natural infection or existing vaccines, they are protecting against this virus. Particularly, I'm talking about the UK virus. In India, the recent our sero survey data, they found that around 25%, Delhi sero surveillance data, it's more than 50% population are already infected. So the infection means they have some level of protection in the population. So if you have some level, your entire population is not a susceptible population. When the disease is new, like this happened last year, when the first time disease entered in India, that time entire population was susceptible population. Now, at country level, at least 25% population is not susceptible population. They have some level of immunity. And in metro cities like Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, almost 50% population, they have some level of immunity. So the chances of this spreading virus very fast in this type of population is very minimal, until unless it's an entirely new variant and your natural infection is not protecting. Then only this can. There is a slight possibility that this South Africa variant, this variant has a lot of variations, and scientists, they are believing, or they hypothesize that most probably this virus, if will enter in another population, so they may cause some problem. But we don't have any sufficient evidence. Whatever we have is just a hypothesis based on the available evidences. So in India, this UK virus is, this is my observation, that it's not creating problem because of we have some level of immunity. And same, just like your old strain of SARS coronavirus 2, this is also, since last almost 2-3 months after September, it's a continuous decline phase. In India, first 6 months from March to September, the graph was upward graph. So continuously that graph was going up in spite of our lockdown, etc. So that means transmission was occurring in population. We started with 600 and then we reached to almost 1 lakh per day. And this happened. And then after September, mid after September, there is a gradual decline. So this, all the data are suggesting that at population level, we have some immunity against this virus. So that's why this is not spreading very fast.
Right. There is still a cover to it. Professor Saxena, so can we assume, for that matter, so far with the spread, or to say the contained spread of the new mutant, that perhaps it doesn't pose that big a threat to us, which it has in the countries of its origin?
Before we comment on this, we have to understand the virus is already 3 types: type A, type B, and type C. The type A virus was the original virus which we have seen in Wuhan. This virus has mutated with 2 more mutations, and that is called type B virus, which is still circulating in Wuhan and the other parts. And type C virus has 1 additional mutation, and that has gone to Europe and the West. Now, what we are having is already A2A that has been done almost 6-7 months back, and India is now have sequenced a lot of 50,000 sequencing data is available, suggesting that the virus which we have is still not as virulent as the others, which we have seen in Europe and other. That is one thing. This is the viral. Now, coming to the host factor, this mutation has this D614G, which we are talking today, has opened a new area to understand that if this mutation happens, then there is a chance that uh, uh, the neutrophil elastase protein, which actually helps in the pathogenesis of the infection or attachment of the spike protein, is going to change. So this suggests that it is more in the Western world and less in the Southeast Asian population and the Indian population, suggesting that we do not have that much risk as the others. Now, number three, this particular mutation has been shown that if there has been a treatment with an inhibitor called alpha-1 antitrypsin called AAT in short, if that can be done, so that supplementation can bring down the infection even in the population where it has been overexpressed. That opens a new avenue to understand that whether this particular mutations can be used for a therapeutic purposes. But however, all these are hypothetical speculation at this moment. Only the data analysis at the in silico level, as Professor Agarwal very well said, that it has to be documented in a much more detail at the clinical level with the phase-wise trials if somebody is thinking on a therapeutic level. However, the one mutation cannot be each and everything. We still have to understand that we have to think beyond this D613. There are several mutations, at least the 8 mutations have been reported in this particular study itself in the ORF8. And because this has a segmented genome and they have a lot of serine proteases which actually help in the in actually cutting the genome so that they code for a new protein. And this story will keep on going over the years, as we know that we are not going to go anywhere with the post-COVID era. Only the thing is the COVID has to go down only, and we are going to go with the COVID vaccine. Maybe we have to take an annual vaccine and so on. So that's how we are going to proceed with this.
That's quite important deduction here that we are obviously not going to change the entire sphere. The COVID has to go, and for that we have to keep taking all the precautions. Well, many thanks Dr. Rakesh Agrawal for joining us, and Dr. Sanjay Rai and Professor Shailendra Saxena for joining us and elucidating on this emerging study, or for that matter, hypothetical study on the variant of protein and other variant it sort of gives birth to, that controls, or to say that somehow directs the spread of any viral disease. But many thanks for joining us. But before we leave, a small appeal by RSTV to all our viewers. Please keep wearing masks, keep washing your hands, and maintain physical distancing. Remember, these 3 small COVID-appropriate behavior are all that we need to control this pandemic.